The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with the Global Alert News Radio Update for GeoEngineeringWatch.org radio, broadcast on KQMS throughout Northern California, Saturday mornings, 6 to 7. This show can also be found recorded on the homepage of GeoEngineeringWatch.org under radio and also on the KQMS website. This is a commercial-free news hour. It's commercial-free because it's paid for out of pocket. That way we can say what we want to say, what needs to be said. 9/11 update from the 9/11 screening of 9/11 Architects and Engineers for Truth last weekend in the Reading Library. Had a full room. My thanks to all those that attended. We passed out free DVDs to everyone. The majority of the crowd did not realize there was a third building that collapsed that fateful day. Certainly had no idea that building fell at free fall speed, something the media has tried to keep out of the public view. They were, I think, astounded at the data. It's certainly shocking to realize your perception of the world is very different from what it actually is, and that we face immense challenges from a power structure that's nothing short of a cancer that's permeated our entire reality. Again, free DVDs were passed out at that event, and I hope everyone who attended will make those DVDs useful. Pass them out to others. Share that information. CalJam, today, Saturday, March 19th, I'm in Southern California speaking at the CalJam event. I hope many have taken the time to come to this event and see the speakers here and the information that they have to share. My sincere thanks to Billy DeMoss and Mary Jane Mirasol, who have put this event on at great expense, great effort to try to bring all these people together. So my sincere regard to the people who have put this show together. Sonoma State University update still, April 27th. I believe that's a Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock. Should be at Sonoma State University. We'll be presenting geoengineering information there. More details on that to come. Another week has passed, another week of the industrialized, militarized juggernaut of insanity that's grinding up what's left of nature to keep the machine moving. That's the purpose of the cancer, to keep expanding. It doesn't care that it's going to kill the host. Understand that. This is a headless, heartless, soulless beast that is not conscious of the fact that it is killing the host. This is another week of the whited-out, cobweb-hazed, aerosol-sprayed skies all over the globe, while the majority of the population remains completely asleep at the wheel, never bothering to look up and remember what skies once looked like before the climate engineering insanity became the norm. On a quick health note, I'm hearing from people all over the globe with chronic respiratory issues such as problems that have become epidemic. The climate engineering fallout is, mathematically speaking, the largest single causal factor in this equation. In addition to the inflammation caused by the microscopic particles from the fallout spraying, fungal infections are a core issue. It's important to remember. Recent studies from institutions like the Mayo Clinic indicate that 95% of all chronic sinusitis is fungus, not bacterial. So when you go to your ENT and he's prescribing antibiotics, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. So keep this in mind when you're attempting to treat the problem. I'll soon give many more details on how to stay healthy in a world that isn't. I'll do this in a coming show. Just want to give that important bit of information right now. Last week we had many more high temperature records shattered in the U.S. On Tuesday, the 15th of March, Nashville was pushing 90 degrees, shattering the former all-time record high and setting a stunning new all-time high record for winter temperatures. And Nashville is only one location. There were countless locations. You don't hear a lot about this on the media because, keep in mind, although many have convinced themselves the media's goal is to overblow the warming, they are underplaying it radically. More on that coming. And even with the record high temperatures, snow magically, yet again, reappears in some of the same record high regions that had record high temperatures only the day before. This weather whiplash, as I've stated in past shows, is absolutely the result of chemical ice nucleation, which is a form of geoengineering. And if you don't believe this, take some courage and actually investigate. Have a reason for your opinion, not just because it feels right to deny something that you don't understand or haven't looked for facts in regard to. So to help with that investigation, here's a headline from Fox News from 2011, because I know many think that Fox is the oracle of truth, which in most cases couldn't be further from the truth. But in fact, Fox is, and I'm not picking on them, by the way, all mainstream media is in the same category. But here's a headline that Fox and many others covered that was openly announced in China. Here's the headline: Artificial snowstorms wreak havoc in Beijing. Here's an excerpt from that report. Chinese scientists have artificially induced the second major snowstorm to wreak havoc on Beijing this season, state media said today, Chinese state media, reigniting debate over the practice of tinkering with Mother Nature, as if this hasn't been going on an unimaginable scale for 7 decades. The report continues. After the earliest snow to hit the capital in 22 years fell on November 1st, the capital was again shrouded in white yesterday, with more snow expected in the coming 3 days, the National Meteorological Center said. China Daily, paper in China, citing an unnamed official, said the Beijing Weather Modification Office had artificially induced both storms by seeding clouds with chemicals. Guess what? This is real. The Chinese can do it. Anybody who thinks that the U.S. can't and isn't doing it, you're not living in reality. So if the Chinese can create snow out of what should have been rain, and they've been doing this, as I said, for a very long time, a NASA patent titled Chemical Ice Nucleation for Weather Modification has existed from the 50s. Does anyone really believe this is not going on when we now regularly see areas going from record high temperatures to snow in a day? In fact, here's a case from Amarillo, Texas. May 1st, 2013, 100 degrees, all-time record high, and May 1st, snowed on May 2nd. We're seeing, again, the paid liars at institutions like the Weather Channel trying to convince us that this is somehow normal, again, to have a winter side of the storm and a spring side of the same storm, while we have areas going from record highs to snow in a day or two. Americans need to wake up soon. The proposals that the science community is now putting out to slow down the disintegration of the biosphere are truly beyond astoundingly impossible at this point. I'll get to that later in the show as well. The mainstream media, weapon of mass programming and distraction, continues to condition the population to the perspective that the power structure wishes to impose. The manufactured left-right divide is fueled from every direction in order to keep the public from realizing that the ship is sinking and the water is coming over the deck now. Or should I say, in this case, coming over the streets of Miami, for example, as sea level rises at unprecedented rates. While extremely dire threats continue to unfold around the globe, what did, quote, fair and balanced Fox News give a long time segment to cover? Sarah Palin's husband's snowmobile accident. We had O.J. Simpson last week. We have the Palin snowmobile accident this week. I mean, is this not truly astounding? Is this news more important than the fact that we're in the 6th great mass extinction event on our planet right now? Obviously not. Obviously there's no comparison between these events, but people are all too willing to stay in this kind of distraction because they don't want to face what's really happening. And again, therein lies the point. That's mainstream media's point. They want to be sure that the population does not catch wind of the fact that the world they've known is imploding by the day. Until the last possible moment, they want to keep this hidden. And fair and balanced Fox News is a total travesty. And again, for the record, all mainstream media is in this category. And this includes people like Glenn Beck. Those who think they're getting lots of truth from Glenn Beck, think again. Beck is a part of the problem. He may address certain issues. But have you ever heard Glenn Beck talk about, oh, by the way, climate engineering is killing the entire planet? Oh, by the way, we're in the 6th great mass extinction? Anything along those lines? And you won't hear it from him either. And this includes the left. Rachel Maddow, Amy Goodman. Amy Goodman is worshipped by people on the left from Democracy Now! As I've stated before, I've met Amy twice. Not a nice person when you meet her face to face and converse with her. Unfortunately. Sorry to say that, but it's true. And I know for a fact Amy is receiving funding from the Ford Foundation and told she can't talk about 9/11 or climate engineering. So there's really no difference between Glenn Beck and Amy Goodman. They're two sides to the same coin. Both bought and sold, paid for, and part of the problem. So all sides of the political fence are all participating in the mass distraction. Again, the absolute core of the delusion we're living in is this. This is the bottom line. Perpetual growth and perpetual conflict on a finite planet with finite resources is absurdly and obviously impossible. How often do we hear the political and media actors of mass deception ranting about sustainable growth? That's truly an oxymoron. Stop and think about that. Sustainable growth. Sustainable growth, by definition, is perpetual growth. We're right back where we started from. You can't have perpetual growth, perpetual conflict on a finite planet with finite resources. This is total delusion. Yes, renewable energy is better than fossil fuels, and certain technologies have most certainly been suppressed. But using renewable energy as an example, wind, hydro, solar, I've lived completely off-grid for 15 years with wind, hydro, and solar power. By the way, geoengineering is greatly diminishing the output from all three of those sources because geoengineering diminishes the hydrological cycle, blocks the sun, and reduces the wind. So yet one more absurdity of geoengineering. But so-called renewable energy is nothing more than a fossil fuel extender. We have to remember that. So many people have convinced themselves that we can keep converting 85 million barrels of fossil fuel into 100 million tons of CO2 every single day, pump that into the atmosphere until it all runs out, and then we can somehow magically convert to renewable energy. This is not going to happen. What do people think it takes to make renewable energy components? An immense amount of fossil fuels. And the production of those components causes great harm to the planet. In fact, some of the gases used in the production of solar panels are 17,000 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. So there's much more to the equation. No silver bullet. On the current trajectory, long before we run out of fossil fuels, the planet and all life on it will be dead, and the global geoengineering insanity will have played a major part in this conclusion. If you don't want this to be the conclusion, I'll say this in the beginning of the show and at the end, then do your part. Prioritize your life. Make your voice heard. Help us to turn the course of the Titanic before it goes to the bottom. Don't sit on the bench and complain or say there's nothing you can do. Don't believe that lie. Help us. Help us to change course. I'll elaborate more on that near the end of this show. Why don't most people understand that this paradigm, this perpetual growth on a finite planet with finite resources, is impossible? Why don't they understand this? On past shows, we've covered Stockholm Syndrome, the propensity of even captors to protect their oppressors from this feeling that somehow their oppressors are looking out for them, much like we have with the American population that feels somehow their government is looking out for them, which could not be further from the truth. We've covered the Millman experiments, in which if someone of authority instructs an individual to do something horrible to another, often they will carry out that deed because they somehow perceive that they have to follow orders, the order followers. Don't be an order follower. And understand this, another major psychological factor that so few take the time to contemplate and understand is cognitive dissonance. If we look at a dictionary definition of cognitive dissonance, it's this. It refers to a situation involving conflicting attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors, conflicting attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. This produces a feeling of discomfort, leading to an alteration in one of the attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors to reduce the discomfort and restore balance. Now, let's put that into context. We live in a society in which cognitive dissonance is absolutely epidemic. And let's frame this in a little more concise fashion. The vast majority refuse to believe that the party they have known was never sustainable and is rapidly coming to an end. Therefore, when people like me try to point out that the ship is going down, they refuse to believe any facts you can present to them because such facts conflict with their choice to believe that the party will go on forever, which is fallacy, which is delusion. The sooner we can shatter the cognitive dissonance of the population, the more chance we might yet have to salvage something of our planet. The same is true with the blind patriotism that seems to be so permeated into our program behavior. That our country is good and everyone else is bad. And it's so black and white. As we see, the military recruiting commercials are completely appalling to me. In fact, the end of the Navy commercial used to say, the Navy, a global force for good. And understand this, I'm not faulting our military brothers and sisters who have signed up for very honorable reasons, as I say, over and over and over. But to truly remain on that honorable ground, you have to look around. You can't be a blind order follower doing the bidding of those in power who don't care at all for your own sons or daughters. They don't care. How much proof do we need for that? 60,000 dead in Vietnam, a war that should have never happened, that started from a false flag event? Or how about the war in Iraq? How many maimed U.S. soldiers did we have there? With the big lie that Saddam Hussein had WMD, which he did not have. He had nothing to do with 9/11, and we know that was planned the whole time. General Wesley Clark proved that 1 week after 9/11 while he was told all the countries that were going to be toppled by the U.S. 1 week after 9/11, 9/11 was the license. And we all know who did 9/11. If you look at the facts, you can't not conclude that elements in our government were behind 9/11. You don't need to know much. Stand back and consider the fact, do you really believe that our military, by far the most sophisticated and capable in the world, was not able to find a rogue hijacked jet for an hour and a half while it circled around and finally crashed into the Pentagon? Do you believe that? And for those who believe that, have you seen pictures of where the jet supposedly crashed and not a shred of wreckage anywhere? Whatever hit the Pentagon, it wasn't an airliner. There's no question about that. So if you're just following the official narrative, blind order follower, comfortable in your cognitive dissonance because you don't want to believe the party's going to end, therefore you ignore all facts presented to you, you're a part of the problem. Please stop being a part of the problem. If you're a person in an agency or some other official that's just blindly following orders, hiding the heavy metal contamination that's pouring out of our skies, contaminating every breath all of us take, stop being a part of the problem. And understand this, the population is waking up. Sooner or later, they'll be forced to wake up, and they're going to want to know why you didn't do your job, why you hid such criminality, if you're an agency official that's hiding these contaminations. Lawsuits are coming on this. It's pending. In fact, I should have announcements, I hope, by next week to update on that issue. We have made a forward stride that I'm not quite able to announce yet, but I will. And hopefully in the coming week. Think about that term, cognitive dissonance. If you're not familiar with it, look it up, try to understand it. A quote from someone from a very long time ago, about 16 decades ago, from someone who I hold in immensely high regard, Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau said this, "Thank God men cannot fly, lest they would lay waste to the sky, as they have done to the earth." And indeed, that has happened. Our skies have been completely decimated every single day with unimaginable amounts of aircraft spewing unimaginable amounts of materials into the sky, toxic materials. It's absolutely going on. Solar radiation, climate engineering is absolutely real. And we know how destructive it is. And since we have a climate science community that's so far not shown the courage to stand out of the shadows, let's look at other studies of other forms of geoengineering. It's not just spraying of the skies for solar radiation management. It also involves ocean iron fertilization. And when I think of what Thoreau said, thank God men cannot fly lest they would lay waste to the skies they have done to the earth, and I would listen to Thoreau's words in years now far past. In what seems like a past life I can vaguely remember when I toiled in the forest restoring habitat while constantly listening to Thoreau on a Walkman. And the narrations of his voice are still so clear to me. Some of our species has had such profoundly clear vision from so long ago, while so many are so incredibly blind today. New report, geoengineering fail. Seeding Pacific with iron won't work as envisioned. What a surprise. Dumping toxic materials into the ocean is not good. How simple is that? From this report, scientists plumbing the depths of the central equatorial Pacific have found ancient sediments suggesting one proposed way to mitigate climate warming, fertilizing the oceans with iron to produce more carbon-eating algae, may not necessarily work as envisioned. Again, simplifying this, dumping toxic industrial waste into the ocean is not a good thing. And it takes how many studies and how many academicians to finally come to that conclusion? The report continues. The researchers in the new study say that increased algae growth in one area can inhibit growth elsewhere. This is because ocean waters are always on the move, and algae also need other nutrients, such as nitrates and phosphates. Given heavy doses of iron, algae in one region may suck up all those other nutrients. By the time the water circulates elsewhere, it has little more to offer. And adding iron doesn't do anything after that. The study appears today in the leading journal Nature. Final paragraph from the report. There's only a limited amount of total nutrients in the ocean. Should that be a surprise? Limited, as we talked earlier, limited resources, limits. Something the power structure doesn't understand. So if there's greater use in one area, it seems you'd have lesser concentrations in other areas, said lead author Cassandra Costa. So, again, here's the bottom line. Climate engineering in the skies or in the oceans, any form of treating nature like an anvil, as if it's that simple that you can just dump toxic waste into the ocean and not upset the whole balance, or you can spray the skies and not upset the whole balance. And the same is true with industrialized civilization, by the way, for those who, with their cognitive dissonance, want to convince themselves that we haven't hurt the planet at all, that everything's fine. None of this is reality. None of it. So, what exactly is happening in the oceans right now? Here's another report. Again, this is the importance of the buildup of heat in the ocean can't be overstated, because once the oceans die, we die. If the oceans die, we die. Here's the headline. Mainstream sources, many of them covered this. You can search it online. Ocean absorption of man-made heat accelerates at colossal rate. You don't see media using these headlines often until it gets to the point where it's horrifically bad. The report continues. A colossal amount of man-made heat has been sucked up by the world's oceans in the past 18 years, and the rate at which that happens has been accelerating. But that's not nearly as good as it sounds. Now, because some people think, great, the ocean's absorbing the heat, so it's not going to be hot on land. Not good. Again, we're talking about very complex systems, so listen carefully to the data presented in this report. Scientists have long known that more than 90% of the heat energy from man-made global warming goes into the world's oceans instead of ground. And they've seen ocean heat content rise in recent years, but the new study using ocean-observing data that goes back to the British research ship Challenger in the 1870s, and including high-tech modern underwater monitors and computer models, tracked how much man-made heat has been buried in the oceans in the past 150 years. The world's oceans absorbed approximately 150 zettajoules. That's an extremely high unit of energy. Zettajoules of energy from 1865 to 1997, and then absorbed another 150 zettajoules in the next 18 years. So consider that the warming in the next 18 years from 1997 to 2015, the oceans absorbed as much energy as they did in the previous approximately 130 years. Radical acceleration. According to a study published Monday in the Journal of Nature, 2.4 billion atomic bombs worth of energy. Think about that. Not 2.4 million, 2.4 billion atomic bombs worth of energy. Thermal energy released in a Hiroshima atomic bomb. The report continues to put that in perspective. If you exploded one atomic bomb the size of the one that was dropped on Hiroshima every second for a year, the total energy released would be 2 zettajoules. So, since 1997, the Earth's oceans have absorbed man-made heat energy equivalent to a Hiroshima-style bomb being exploded every second for 75 straight years. About 2.4 billion atomic bombs. The changes we're talking about are unimaginably huge numbers, said co-author Paul Dirac, an oceanographer at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California. And to consider, as I've quoted in past shows, the planet is warming right now at the rate of about 4 Hiroshima-style bombs per second. That's how fast the increase has happened. From 1 a second over the past 150 years back to 1865 approximately, to today we're at the rate of 4 per second. Because there are decades when good data wasn't available and computer simulations are involved, the overall figures are rough but still reliable. The study's authors concluded most of the added heat has been trapped in the upper 700 meters, 2,300 feet, but with every year, the deeper oceans also are absorbing more energy. The study's authors and outside experts say it's not the raw numbers that bother them, it's how fast those numbers are increasing them. Quote, after 2000, the year 2000, in particular, the rate of change is really starting to ramp up, the study's authors said. This means the amount of energy being trapped in Earth's climate system as a whole is accelerating astoundingly, the study's lead author, Peter Glecker, stated. Again, a climate scientist. He's a climate scientist at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory as well. Ocean temperature barely rose. When oceans absorb all that heat, it keeps the surface from getting warmer from the heat-trapping gases spewed by the burning of coal and gas, the scientists said. And of course, these reports always omit climate engineering. They're not allowed to talk about climate engineering that can cause regional cool downs with chemical nucleation and other processes that block the sun, reducing daytime highs, but that trap more heat than they deflect, shred the ozone layer, disrupt the hydrological cycle, and completely poison the forest, creating more lightning, more fires. Unimaginably long list of negative planetary warming effects from climate engineering, not even mentioned or taken into account in these reports. Consider that. This report continues. The warmer the oceans get, the less heat they can absorb, and the more the heat stays in the air and on land surface, says the study's author. These findings have, now listen to this, because I've talked about this in past shows. These findings have potentially serious consequences for life in the oceans as well as for patterns of ocean circulation, storm tracks, and storm intensity. Now, if the oceans are superheating, how can you say that that has potentially serious consequences? Again, we're back to leaping off the 100-story building and saying you could get hurt after you hit the sidewalk from falling 100 stories. And this is the sort of really criminal downplaying we have from the climate science community. They're not allowed to tell it like it is, or they get fired. And that's contrary to what most people have been trained to believe. And to back that up, as the testimony gets more serious from scientists again, Australia's just fired 300 of their scientists. Canada's laid off many of theirs. We have a gag order, federal gag order on all National Weather Service and no employees. If you think that employees get paid more for really disclosing how bad things are, you've bought the propaganda, sorry to say. Final statement from the report. One outside scientist, Kevin Trinberth, climate analysis chief at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, has also been examining the ocean heat content, and he said in his ongoing work shows that the Glecker team, the team that just stated how bad the situation was, quote, significantly underestimates how much heat the ocean has absorbed. It's worse than this report stated. Everything that we're seeing so far is far worse than the original reports. Consider that. So, what is the climate science community proposing? We know geoengineering is a completely unimaginably insane action by the military-industrial complex and the climate science community. So now here's another report that should really paint a clear picture as to just how far from reality these people are when they think they can tech fix what they've done. Here's the headline. This is on many mainstream sources. Mind-boggling study shows just how massive sea level rise really is. This is from Reuters. You people know who Reuters is. Report continues. As our planet continues to warm, coastlines worldwide will retreat inland. In the long run, by a lot. That means some coastal cities in places like Florida, where Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders debated precisely this topic on Wednesday night, stand to lose quite a lot of land where people currently live and own property. By the way, Miami is pumping out just about every high tide already, for any who choose to look that up. That doesn't come from a world that's cooling, as some would like to convince themselves of. Oceans rise from thermal expansion. As the oceans warm, it causes them to rise, and from ice melting, both of which are happening at an astounding pace, both of which are being made far worse overall, not better, by global climate engineering, the single greatest assault ever launched on the planet, its life support systems, and the web of life. Greatest assault ever launched by the human race. So again, to reiterate, here's the proposal that is put forth in this, quote, mind-boggling report. Here's their idea. Simply put, it's to pump excess seawater more than 2 miles into the air to the top of the Antarctic ice sheet, where, in theory, they feel it would refreeze and stay put for a very long time. Now, although not forever, the new study accordingly uses a computer model of Antarctica to study the consequences of adding huge volumes of salt water to different portions of the ice sheet. The problem with using geoengineering, again, this is another form of geoengineering, many forms of geoengineering, to counter rising seas, is that every millimeter of sea level rise is equivalent to 360 billion tons of ocean water. And seas are currently rising at a rate of 3 millimeters per year and increasing rapidly, with the rate of increase expected to grow still further in the future. The modeling of the study suggests that pumping water deep into the center of Antarctica, 700 kilometers inland and over 2 miles, again, in altitude, would indeed keep it there for a good long while. Now, at face value, how ridiculous is this proposal? What do you think happens to the ice sheet when you start pumping massive amounts of warm salt water to the top and letting it flow through the ice sheet, flowing through what's called a moulin as it forms holes in the ice sheet and runs down to the bedrock, exactly what's happening in Greenland, and starts to lubricate the bedrock below the glaciers and thus causing them to slide further? This is our science community. They're an incredible failure, our climate science community, by so many measures. They are absolutely abysmally failing to do their jobs with any sort of rational approach. Pumping hundreds of billions of tons of seawater in a warming world to more rapidly melt the ice that's left, and that's going to save us from sea level rise? I don't even have the words for this kind of thing anymore. I mean, it's so far beyond preposterous, and this is from a peer-reviewed study. Think about that. And we have one of the authors of this study, named Liverman, who says then that in 1,000 years, only 20% of its equivalent, the seawater, will return to the ocean. How can he possibly say something like that? With all the factors that we just named at face value, it's obviously going to melt the ice, lubricate it from below. The world is warming at an astounding pace, and he's making projections that only 20% of this will return. And how much energy would it take which also warms the planet, to get this ice 2 miles up into the air, get this water up into the air. And how is it going to... It takes a tremendous amount of energy from the ice to cool that seawater. I mean, this is the most hip-shot study one could imagine. It's so utterly and totally preposterous, just like the AMIG scientists, who I mentioned last week, who proposed massive 4 kilometer square plastic sheets to cap the methane that's leaking from the floor of the Arctic Ocean. Now, does anyone think that could possibly be done? 900-ton sheets of plastic. What, are you going to roll it out in the seafloor and hope it stays? That it's not going to just float to the surface with the methane? And these are our scientists, and we've been taught to worship the scientists, pumping literally thousands of billions of tons to the top of the Antarctic ice cap to even slow down the ocean rise, and think that that's going to somehow be productive, spraying the skies with toxic metal particulates, which we're all breathing, which is killing virtually the entire web of life, and warming the planet overall, not cooling it, dumping iron oxide into the oceans, killing the oceans, and it's going on, by the way. We know that's going on. In fact, when we have the dead zones that are cropping up around the globe, and what appears to be the chemical signature of the elements being used in solar radiation management being sprayed over the oceans, that is likely also being utilized for ocean iron fertilization to force the ocean to suck up more CO2, which has helped to hide the warming for a while at the cost of making the overall scenario far worse, not better. Exactly what we said at GeoEngineering Watch for the last 7 years. And what I've said before I had GeoEngineeringWatch.org in the years before. How obvious can these scenarios be? And yet, again, we're taught to worship the scientists, not to question them. We need to wake up and use our sense of reason. That's our greatest gift. If we don't use it, then we're failures as a species, period. Now, I want to get to the fact that many have unfortunately been confused by the recent reports of weather modification that were published in some Southern California papers. A lot of people have posted this. These reports were designed to distract people from the geoengineering elephant in the room, and that's exactly what they did, distract people. When people assume, and I think some very big websites assume this, that this is somehow geoengineering, it's not. This is small-scale weather modification, and when people are shown pictures of small aircraft with flares tied to the wings that seem very benign, that can't really have a huge effect in the environment, and then they convince themselves that that's all that's going on in the sky, so therefore they ignore the climate engineering monster that's spraying. A single aircraft can spray 60 to 70 tons of nanoparticulates in one flight. And so I'm not sure why everybody jumped on this. Again, it was confusing for a lot of people. They seem to think this was some admission to geoengineering. It's not. It's an admission to climate modification on a small scale, which we have 200 separate programs publicized in the U.S. every single year on that scale. They're just red herrings. Distractions, that's all. We need to keep our focus on geoengineering, solar radiation management, climate engineering, and not be distracted by some local weather modification program that does virtually nothing in the bigger context. Nothing. It was a mass distraction. That's all that was. To distract us while the biosphere is disintegrating all around us. So the bottom line is this. The planet, all available data indicates, is already in a runaway greenhouse scenario. How far will that go? In many ways, that may still depend on us. We're past the point of a return to the planet we have known. That does not mean necessarily that we can't still salvage a planet that supports life. But we need to take action immediately, starting with exposing and stopping climate engineering, because climate engineering, again, as I state over and over and over, is making an already horrific scenario far worse, not better. So here's a recent headline to consider. This is a week or so old. From many major sources, I encourage people to investigate this online themselves. Stunned by February temperature spike, scientists declare climate emergency. The report continues. NASA data shows the global surface temperatures warmed last month by an unprecedented margin. And again, everywhere we check ground temperatures, we are seeing an under-reporting of the temperatures. Not an over-reporting as many people would like to believe, but an under-reporting. New data from NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies shows February temperatures shattered all previous warm weather records. However, this was no ordinary record-breaking month, which we've seen a lot of lately. That's from the report. I'm reading right from the report, which we've seen a lot of lately. It's right from the report. The average global surface temperature was 1.35 degrees Celsius warmer than the 1951 to 1980 average, which, by the way, that average being used as a baseline already contains significant warming on the planet. So that doesn't really reflect how much the planet has warmed since the Industrial Revolution, 1850. You can add about another, depending on the study you look at, half a degree C, which is almost 1 degree Fahrenheit to that. We're much, much warmer than people realize. The planet has warmed much more than people realize. And the equation is extremely, can't say this strongly enough, the equation is extremely non-linear. That means it's picking up momentum very, very rapidly. So many people have been trained to believe, have been programmed, that any biosphere changes take place over millennia, or at least over many centuries. But we're not talking about natural changes here. That's what's so important for people to realize. That's what so many people don't want to realize. Back to the cognitive dissonance, this belief that we could loot, plunder, and pillage the planet without consequence. That's just not reality. And I know a lot of my reports don't gain favor with people or popularity with people, and I'm sorry, but I can't concern myself with that. I just can't. That's not my role. It's not my purpose. I'm simply trying to deliver reality so that we might yet change course. You can't correct a course unless you have a clear picture of where you don't want to go and where you do want to go. You can't cross a deep, dark forest that's completely covered in canopy with massive canyons and valleys and where you can't see for any distance at all without constantly checking your compass heading. You can't do it. And I know about that. Spent a lot of time in the wilderness in areas that you can't navigate without very carefully and consistently checking your heading. You can't, or you'll end up very, very lost in a place where there is no trails and extremely difficult for anybody to reach you. So relying on that compass heading is imperative, and you must check it often. And check your topographical maps so that the features you're passing, whether it's a 1,000-foot canyon drop-off or some rock escarpment, so you can see those features on the map ahead of you, and you can corroborate your location. We have to do the same thing. We have to. It's incumbent on all of us. The planet is warming at astounding speed and picking up momentum by the day, and climate engineering is making it worse. This headline illustrates only a small sample of the bigger picture, again, that's unfolding. As I stated, the planet's in full-blown meltdown mode, climate engineering fueling the overall fire. Climate engineering can create short-term cool-downs at the consequence of a worsened overall warming. And they use those cool-downs for headlines to confuse and divide people as to the true state of the climate. And it's worked for a long time. But it's failing now because the warming is so rapidly increasing. And even now, astoundingly, many are still ranting the completely absurd fossil fuel industry program narrative that, quote, human-caused global warming is a hoax. If you have convinced yourself that the total decimation being inflicted on the planet by the human race has not had an effect on Earth's energy balance, you're not living in reality. I stress this is not about Al Gore, the criminal. I don't say that lightly either. He certainly is, in many ways. Carbon credits are a sham. But It's not about those things. Again, it's about reality. Geoengineering is at the top of the list of destructive forces on the planet. But the list is unimaginably long and complex. It's not just climate engineering, as many people would like to believe. The atmosphere doesn't know the difference on what affects it. If it's a particulate out of a smokestack, or 100 million tons a day of carbon, or cutting down the forests. Again, we've lost 3.4 trillion trees since the dawn of civilization. 55% of Earth's trees, and the rest of the trees are dying by the day. All these things, paving the planet, poisoning the oceans, all these things have immense effects. And to ignore them is to remain in cognitive dissonance, period. Denial, period. If you don't believe the planet's warming, you have done no objective frontline research from frontline sources. And thus, and I'm sorry to those that this will offend, but this is the truth. If you don't believe the planet is warming, you're in the same category as those who believe the Earth is flat. And I fully realize that my saying the Earth isn't flat will angry many people that have convinced themselves the Earth is flat. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry to offend those people. But enough is enough. Enough of the nonsense and denial is enough. Is the moon also flat? Is the sun flat? Is the universe perhaps flat also? No. The Earth is round. This is beyond any rational dispute. The globe is in meltdown. And this is a horrifyingly real scenario. And again, I will state, climate engineering is making it worse, not better. Denial of reality only hurts credibility. It only reduces the odds of a successful outcome in the battle to expose and halt climate engineering. And if your goal is to expose and halt climate engineering, and you're ranting that, quote, global warming is a hoax, you're not helping the cause where it counts. Not with the non-choir. And that's the legions of academicians that we need to reach, that we need to find their courage and to come out of the shadows to join us in this fight. The same is true with the environmental groups. So far, they've shown no courage in regard to facing the climate engineering issue. This is truly astounding to me. I am an environmentalist. I would gladly live in the most primitive of conditions on a healthy planet. I would trade any amount of modern material, anything, to live in the most primitive conditions, again, on a healthy planet. I don't have that choice. All I can do is try to save what's left of the planet that's here. So I am an environmentalist, but I don't understand the behavior of the quote-unquote environmentalists. I truly don't understand the hypocrisy that I see from the Stop Global Warming communities that are ignoring the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all. Because you can't legitimately discuss the climate without discussing climate engineering first and foremost. And climate engineering is an even bigger failure than ocean iron fertilization, which is now, by peer-reviewed study, proven to be a failure. All these forms of techno-fixes are simply extensions of the propensity of the human race to try to tech their way out of the disasters they've already caused and causing even bigger disasters in the process. Just like Project Lucy and Project Alamo, the microwaving of the atmosphere that is occurring right now. Data indicates it's occurring right now. They're microwaving the atmosphere to try to degrade the methane that's filling the atmosphere, that has been in many ways fueled also by climate engineering, because climate engineering has altered upper level wind currents, that's altered ocean currents. Now we have warm water pumping into the Arctic. It's releasing methane. I mentioned earlier the preposterous proposal by the AMIG group, the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, to cover the seafloor with incomprehensibly large 1,000-ton sheets of plastic I mean, these proposals are so ridiculous that they don't warrant even legitimate discussion, any more so than the most recent peer-reviewed report that proposes pumping thousands of billions of tons of seawater to the top of the Antarctic Peninsula, which would clearly have cataclysmic effects. And yet, we have institutions that will approve such a report? And how can that happen? Because again, all roads go back to those who print the money. And we have the military-industrial complex able to pay scientists to say whatever they want them to say. Period. Whatever goal they want to achieve, whatever conclusion they want to arrive at, they pay academicians to come to such a conclusion. So we have academicians stating that this is just condensation we see in the skies. Even though we have film footage, inarguable film footage, of these tankers turning on and off. We have photographs of the nozzles. We have the same materials listed in climate engineering patents showing up on the ground in unimaginable quantities. We have the expected shredding of the ozone layer that we know has to happen when you fill the atmosphere with particulates. We have institutions like NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, admitting on the record that in the last 15 years the atmosphere has filled with particulates and they don't know where most of them are coming from. And yet we have scientists that will say whatever they're told to say because that's what their paymasters want them to do. Same as the 9/11 Commission, by the way, again on Building 7, that said that the building fell down at free fall speed from some furniture burning in the first floor. We are surrounded, we are immersed, we are swimming in the sea of lies. So again, if we're going to reach the climate science community, if we're going to reach the environmental community as an anti-geoengineering movement, we have to stand on credible facts, period. And if you care about the outcome of this battle, it's your responsibility to investigate the facts and get your facts straight. If you really care about the fight against climate engineering. The climate disintegration is not as bad as Gore said. In fact, it's exponentially worse. And once again, geoengineering is helping to fuel the overall fire. So what can we do? An unimaginable amount of people ask me that question. All I ask is this: investigate, and then take the obvious action. Sound the alarm by sharing credible data anywhere, everywhere you possibly can. Tell those you share with to also carry the ball forward. Tell them that each and every day counts. And pass on credible data. That's so much more effective than pointing at the sky and ranting. Learn to be effective in the battle, not to just vent your emotions and vent your fears and vent your angst and vent your anxiety, because that doesn't help. It doesn't help. If you're on a comment section of an article and you're trying to share information with others, do it in a productive way. Don't do it in a way that will alienate the tribes from each other. Do your part to help unite the tribes. Try not to offend other people that might have some different views from you on other issues, but that want to fight by your side with this issue. Don't alienate those people. Be conscious when you post a comment on a blog, and I know because I look at a lot of those comments, I have to. It's part of my job. But that job would be much easier if people would make the effort to unite the tribes and not divide the tribes. We're all in this together. We will sink or swim together. All of us. Those that are asking, what do we do? Again, look for information. There are activist instructions on the top left of the GeoEngineering Watch homepage. Every single day, we must all prioritize our time, our actions. We must keep our focus squarely on the fight for the common good, and that starts with exposing and stopping climate engineering. There is no greater nor a more immediate threat to all life on Earth, short of nuclear cataclysm, than the climate engineering assault. That's a mathematical fact. Look at the presentations on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org and you'll learn much more about why that's true. So, again, we must all keep our focus squarely on the fight for the common good, the greater good. Anything less is a betrayal to all that we hold dear. Anything less is a betrayal to every child that is counting on us to somehow salvage a world for them that still supports life. Don't just say you care, show it. Make your voice heard. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.